meeting to order.
Yep,
Sorry,
crushing
guys.
it. You're good.
A little green on the old chairing the meeting situation, so. Yeah, we can go around and introduce ourselves. Seth, he's a vice chair, but sitting in his chair, doing a questionable job.
Fantastic.
Fine.
Jillian, Planning Board Administrative Assistant, forgetting the guest speaker on the agenda.
Letty Bedard, I'm the select board rep.
Doug Marino. I'm Doug.
I'm Doug too. Doug Finnan, Planning Board.
David.
Yeah, I'm Dave Walker with the Rockingham Planning Commission.
So Dave has graciously agreed to come give us a quick presentation on the project solicitation process that's going on right now, through the Rockingham Planning Commission. And this is just very timely information because the deadline for submitting potential projects or updating, and he'll get into this in the presentation, not to steal your thunder, but the deadline's fast approaching, so hopefully once the town has all the facts, we can decide if there are any actions that we want to take.
Do we have to have a quorum first?
That was gonna be my question, because
We have a quorum.
We have 4.
You have a quorum.
Yeah, we should, I think it would probably be good to bring up maybe one.
Who's in rotation?
How many alternates do we have?
Who?
Kate would be next.
Is Kate here?
Well, we might,
Kate is here.
2 active, so Kate.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
I,
She can vote. That's why.
Of course.
I don't think we have like a thing for.
No, voting on it.
And Kristen had said she might zoom in. No? Okay. I just
She's
want,
in what, like Bali or something?
yep.
somewhere warm.
Yeah, so I think, Dave, if you wanna dive in.
Sure. Can you run the presentation from there?
Sure.
All right, so, my name's Dave Walker. I'm with the Rockingham Planning Commission. I'm the Assistant Director there. I run our transportation planning program. We are in the midst of what we call our project solicitation and selection process. And this is something that we do sort of in tandem with the State Department of Transportation. Really serves a couple of purposes for us. So, first thing, hit to the next slide if we could. I have with me a handout here that I can share with you all. So all the information I'm going to talk about tonight, for the most part, is included on this 2-page handout that I have. It just really gives an overview of our process and why we do the things that we do and when we do them and that kind of thing. So the next slide. So really there's 3 pieces to the new transportation planning process in New Hampshire that we're dealing with as part of this. We, as a metropolitan planning organization, have a responsibility for the federal components of this process, which is dealing with our long-range transportation plan, which is a document that looks out 20 or more years. It's like a big, kind of a big picture document, right? What does the region need over the next 20 years for transportation improvements? Then we have also the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. This is the immediate term. What projects are being implemented over the next several years? In this case, our current TIP, as we call it, is the 2023 to 2026 Transportation Improvement Program. And so it deals with any projects that are being constructed in the region or designed or implemented in some way in the region. In between sits the state 10-year plan, which I'm sure many of you have heard of and are aware of. This is a state-driven process by the Department of Transportation and the Governor's Council that kind of sits in the middle. And our goal is that we use our project, our long-range plan to kind of identify project needs in the region. We use the state 10-year plan process to kind of prioritize those needs, figure out which are the most important to start getting in the queue to construct now. And then when they actually make it to that queue, the tip is where they actually get constructed. So it's a stepping process that we move from concept to implementation on these projects. So if we could hit the next slide, please. Right, currently in our region, as of right now, we've identified 153 different transportation projects scattered through our 27 communities. That's over $1 billion estimated work that needs to happen. These range from very small, local, Main Street type projects to, you know, tens of millions of dollar types improvements, and it's sort of everything in between. We have 27 communities, and so as you can imagine, there are a lot of different needs that are out there between those communities. 53 of those projects are already in the queue somewhere. They're either in the 10-year plan, and they're moving towards implementation and design, or they're in the tip, where they're being constructed or being actively worked on in detailing out exactly what will be built. So, and the tip work and the 10-year plan work, that's about half the cost, half the total cost, about $465 million worth of projects. So it's a lot going on, a lot of needs out there. Next slide, please. So what we have and what we're embarking on now is part of our project solicitation process. And this is, again, sort of this hybrid piece between our federal and regional MPO process and the state 10-year plan process. And we all sort of organize, all the 9 planning commissions organize around the State Department of Transportation and their timeframes for the 10-year plan process. So we solicit for projects usually in the spring and early summer of even numbered years. And our goal is to understand the transportation needs of our region. Whether that is, fully defined and engineered projects, or just a community's understanding that there is a certain transportation problem that they need addressed, and we can try to figure out an opportunity to try to address it in some way. So we started that in April. We are looking for projects to be returned to us by the beginning of June 5th specifically. And this deadline really is specifically for the purpose of identifying projects for this iteration of the state 10-year plan. Communities can submit projects to us anytime, but we have to have kind of a cutoff to have our project sort of all organized so that we can get through the prioritization process and get DOT the information they need this fall to start working on what they need to work on. So we have to kind of have a cutoff. But basically the 2 pieces that we look for from the communities are, if you already have a project that's identified in our long range plan or in the state 10-year plan, does that still remain a priority? And then the second piece is, if you don't have a project, or if you've found some other need that's out there in your community, do you have a new project that you'd like to submit for that? So really just 2 pieces of that. And so we kind of step through, once those projects come in, we have some work that we have to do on those. Move to the next slide, please. So we do an evaluation process, and this is something that we're actually starting now, even before the new projects are coming in. We evaluate all the existing projects to make sure that that we're still interested in pursuing them to some degree. We look for the information that we have on them. Do we have updated traffic count data? Or do we have updated crash data? Making sure that communities are still interested in the types of projects or the projects that we have listed for them. And so once we've done that, we also then, the next step we do is any new projects that come in, we break into 3 groups, right? So we tend to look at the projects to start with based on sort of the scale. If you think about the scale of the focus of the project or the impacts of the project, so we look at it like a local scale project. That's kind of a Main Street project. It's looking at what are the impacts, a project that maybe is, pedestrian improvements on Main Street. So impacts are fairly localized. It's happening within that community. And we try to compare those types of projects against each other, even though some might be a pedestrian project, others might be a safety improvement for motor vehicles, those type of things. But we're looking at that same scale of project. Regional projects are looking at those projects that improve the connections between communities. And then the interregional projects are the projects that are looking at connecting our region to other regions of the state or other states. Those tend to be on the larger highways, such as, you know, I-95, I-93, 101, places like that, whereas, you know, local projects tend to be more on, you know, the main street or whatever type, you know, town center type project is, and the regional project is somewhere in the middle. Some tend to be on state highways, you know, potentially on 125, for instance, or it could be something that's more, you know, another type of connection between communities. Could even be a transit project between communities, that kind of thing. So, next slide, please. So we take that breakdown of projects, we break the projects down into 3 groups, and then we do a prioritization process. So we look at 4 different pieces of this. First thing we look at, is the project feasible, and is it a reasonable approach to solving the problem? You know, and that, you know, are we addressing something that's sort of a clearly defined need, and is the way that the community is looking to go about it, is it something that is reasonable in nature? For instance, you know, we've had some discussions with like the city of Portsmouth about connections across the Piscataqua River. If they propose to put a tunnel there instead of, say, the Memorial Bridge, that's not a feasible and reasonable approach to the project. It's incredibly expensive, incredibly hard to get permitted, and would require amazing changes to the city of Portsmouth and the city in Kittery as well. You know, so those are the types of things, and we try to sort of shunt those types of projects off to the side a little bit as for future consideration, or maybe a different approach kind of thing. The second thing we look for is sort of demonstrated community support. We don't want a community to put forward something that they aren't truly interested in, so we like to see projects that have had either some larger discussions by the community or by the planning board, the select board, you know, just some larger interest. You know, for instance, here in Brentwood, the work that was done around the rec center access to 125 and the roundabout, and that's the kind of thing that we'd like to see, because it shows that the community's given some thought to a project. They put some numbers behind it, ideally, but it's more than just somebody had an idea that they sketched on the back of an envelope and threw it at me, kind of thing. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Third piece that we look at is the project eligible for federal funding programs? Most projects on state highways are going to be eligible. There's limited eligibility for projects that are on local roadways. It's not completely ineligible, and for different types of projects, you know, there's sort of this myriad of different funding programs out there. Most of them deal with state highways and that are eligible that way, but there are a handful that work for any roads out there, particularly safety projects. If a road has a particular safety issue, we can often find funding through a couple of different sources there. And the fourth piece of it is looking at our selection criteria. And we have a set of 7 project selection criteria that we use to evaluate projects. And these general categories that I've got up here on the board, those are the ones that are set statewide. So all the 9 planning commissions use these same criteria, although we weight them differently. And I'm just briefly going to kind of cover what they are. Economic development, we're looking at what is the potential economic benefits of the project. Particularly, we look at does the project have benefits towards goods movement and freight travel. Equity and accessibility, we're looking at what are the impacts of a project on communities that tend to bear the brunt of impacts and not the benefits. But we're also looking at things like, does the project improve accessibility for folks that had limitations, sort of mobility limitations, things like that. So we're looking at accessibility that way. Mobility, we're looking at, does it improve the ability to get from place to place between communities largely? And mobility tends to focus around auto traffic, because it means, can we get from point A to B faster and more efficiently, that sort of thing. Resiliency, we look at, does the project have an impact on the resiliency of the transportation system to natural hazards? Particularly, this is a particular interest in the coastal communities, but it also involves, stream flooding and inland communities is primarily what we're looking at this point. So things like undersized culverts and that kind of thing. Network significance. This is the the role that a particular road plays in the transportation network. So for instance, 125 is considered of greater network significance than Route 111A is, or Main Street, you know, in terms of the hierarchy of roads in the network. Safety, and this is an important one, you know, what are the safety benefits? We look at both what are the benefits of the project that's being proposed, does it have demonstrated safety benefits, as well as is there a known safety issue at the particular location that there is being looked at? And then state of repair is looking at, you know, what is the condition of the roadway or the bridge that's being discussed as a project, and you know, DOT has kind of this policy for roads and bridges, and where they want to keep the good roads good, right? So they want to address those roads that are in decent shape. They want to keep them in good shape because it's cheaper to do that than to rebuild them. Bridges, on the other hand, they deal with the worst first. So those bridges that are in the worst condition, they want to deal with first. And so we try to address that as part of this as well. Next slide, please. So we take all of the projects that we have, new ones, existing ones, those at least those that are not already in the 10-year plan or the TIP. In this case, we're starting with around 100 projects that we're dealing with, and plus any new ones that come in. We put them into those three groups, and we score them based on those project selection criteria that I discussed. And we then take the top 5 from each of those groups, and we bring it to our Transportation Advisory Committee, and we talk about which of these 15 projects would we like to see move forward. And what we do at that point is we're really just picking projects to go to get some further engineering work done on them. And so we hire an engineering firm that comes in and they help us develop project cost estimates and scope and refine scopes. So we don't have enough funding for this to do all 15, but we usually have funding to do somewhere between 6 to 10 projects. And so out of that group of 15, we shortlist the top 6 to 10 out of that based on the discussion at the Transportation Advisory Committee. We send those projects to our consulting engineering firm to have them develop the estimates. We also are going this year, and this is a little different than what we've done in the past, and this is based on past experience, we're going to run these projects by DOT before we send them to the engineering team. Last round, we didn't do that, and we chose a scope for a project, or a couple of projects, and DOT was like, well, why did you choose that scope? We would have done it this way, and so we're trying to avoid that disconnect and talk to them first and make sure, you know, like we had proposed a roundabout for a particular location because that seemed like it made sense, and they're like, well, why didn't you do signals? And so we want to avoid that because that just wastes everybody's time. So we want to have that conversation first before we run into any problems. We will send then that list of projects to the consulting engineers, and they'll spend the summer developing our scope and cost estimates, and we'll try to move forward from there. So next slide, please. So when those projects come back, we have to take those estimates and turn it into a single list of priorities for the DOT. And we have to constrain it to what's called a regional budget target for each cycle of the 10-year plan. And so for each cycle of the 10-year plan, DOT gives us the authority to program about $8.1 million. For a little perspective, that is less than 1% of the 10-year plan that we are working with, so each cycle. So it's a very small drop in the budget. The 10-year plan each year is about $500 million. So but it gives us the opportunity to program 1 to 2, sometimes 3 projects, depending on scale. So we take that short list of projects that we've sent to the engineers, we get the information back from them, and we then, back at our Transportation Advisory Committee, we prioritize those that we have the better information on, and we say, these are our top projects, and we rank them, and we can send to DOT the number of projects that fit within that constrained budget, plus 2 additional projects. And those go to DOT for scope and cost review over the winter, and basically from November to roughly February, they do that process. And they come back to us in February. If we could go to the next slide, please. And we have to take that, what they give us back, which is often revised cost estimates and revised scope suggestions, and we have to constrain that to the budget. So it often means that we have to cut back on the number of projects that we put forward. And then by law, as part of the 10-year plan process, we have to submit our priorities to the DOT by the end of March of odd numbered years. So it's a long process. It takes us over a year to kind of go through this. But in the end, we've sort of whittled down those 100 or so projects down to what are our top handful of priorities for that cycle. So next slide, please. So, you know, sort of, I'm sure you're asking yourself, oh, so what do we do as part of this? So the pieces that I think are most important for the community to be involved in is, one, sort of identifying and commuting your transportation needs to us. If you have supporting documentation and analysis, such as with the work that you did around the rec center, that is perfect. That is exactly kind of the thing we're looking for. If you have that back of the envelope sketch of an idea of a project, we can take that too, because it's an identified need. We just may not be able to do as much with it initially, and it may have to sit for a while and kind of work its way through the process a little more slowly. The second thing is, if you do have those ideas that are maybe more back of the envelope and not as much detail them, work within your community to document support and to provide that sort of analysis if you can do that. And then third, and this is really important for me and for the RPC, is having strong community participation on our Transportation Advisory Committee and on the commission itself is really helpful, because we found that those communities that are involved and participate see the benefits of that through more likely to see a project come through. So, and that's really all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have or comments or.
Right off the bat.
Yeah.
How extensive is the application for, let's say, a roundabout on 125, with supporting documents through the charrette? And also, we've had the South Road.
The DOT.
With the DOT.
Yep, so the South Road project, for instance, that's going to sort of make its way automatically into the 10-year plan and into the TIP, because it's a part of the Highway Safety Improvement Program. So projects within that tend to take a shortcut through the 10-year plan process, because it's an identified and documented safety issue that the Department of Transportation has already spent money to engineer some improvements. So and that's part of the purpose of that Highway Safety Improvement Program is to do exactly that, is to sort of fast track those safety issue projects.
Okay.
The application process, I don't think it's too onerous. It's hard to say how long the application is, because we built a portal so you can submit new projects electronically, and it's a GIS based. So you go in and you say, I want a project here, and it brings up some fields that you fill out. And we recognize that a lot of these projects that are coming forward at this stage are very, they're not super well defined in nature. They're very general. They're more concept than engineered solution. So we recognize that, and so there are fields in there that you may not be able to answer. Like you may not have defined an exact cost for the project.
Does it have to be supported by initiated by the select board, planning board, or economic?
Ideally, we get some communication from the select board basically saying, yes, we support submitting this project.
Okay.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be anything more in depth than that.
Okay.
If you have multiple projects, what we would like to see is our priorities from the town are A, B, C, and D, and that kind of thing, because that helps us out as well in terms of identifying, so which should we put forward first, I did send out in April an email to all the town administrators and town managers. And so, Karen has that information and the links to like the portal to enter projects, that kind of thing. So, and I believe I sent it to our TAC and our commissioner, so you guys should have that.
Yeah.
If for some reason you don't, definitely reach out to me, and we can make sure you have that information.
Yeah, I have it.
I do too. Yeah.
I think you've mentioned this maybe at a TAC meeting, or another meeting, but for the benefit of the other board members, would you say it's true that even if you enter a project without a lot of detail and it, sits for a bit, that there could be benefits, in the sense of if the town were to apply for grants or something, being
Yep.
able to say, this project's in the long-range transportation
Yes,
plan.
absolutely.
Because we submitted it, it couldn't hurt.
Right. Some of the funding programs, some of the, especially some of the more competitive ones, they want to see projects that aren't just, suddenly appearing out of nowhere. They want to see that the communities have given some thought to them and that there's some priority there. And so having it in our long-range transportation plan, while it doesn't mean it's a funded project that's going to be built, it can give you a little bit of a boost in some of those competitive programs to help that way.
Because I'm thinking for Brentwood, obviously the deadline's approaching quickly, and as you mentioned, it's not a super laborious process to enter a project. Like the roundabout at the rec center, for example, I think we have a sketch, but we don't have an estimate, and I don't think it's realistic to assume the town could get under contract with an engineer and prepare one and even come to consensus if they want to submit it.
Right.
But if everyone agreed to submit what we have, just to get the
Yeah.
process started, we could always follow up in the next round in more detail if we wanted.
Yeah, and we, at the stage that we're looking at, you don't necessarily need to have an engineered estimate to submit a project. If you looked at a comparable project and said, oh, DOT did this project in this community and it's very similar to what we're doing and it's $3 million, that works for me. Especially, when we're talking about the long-range plan, it's conceptual level. If it makes it through the prioritization process and gets to the top, that's why we've hired the engineers, to be able to give us a more refined scope and cost and put some of those, so that the towns don't necessarily have to hire an engineer to do that. And granted, this is a planning level scope and cost estimate that we're doing. It's not super detailed, but it's enough for DOT to sort of evaluate and give some feedback against.
Yeah. Another question, I think this came up at that recent meeting discussing the highway safety improvement project. I may have misinterpreted, but were you saying that we could consider submitting the long-term solution they offered as a potential tip or tenure plan project?
Right,
Because they were more focused on the intermediate solution.
yes,
And it seemed like so the intermediate solution was a two-way,
The turn
Turn
lane,
lane,
yeah,
turn lane.
yeah.
whereas the long-term solution was a roundabout. And it seemed like there was some interest for a roundabout. There's some opponents too, so it would have to be discussed in town, but just if that was a priority, just to get it on there
Yep.
as soon as possible.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some cases with an HSIP project, the Highway Safety Improvement Program project, DOT
Good point.
goes right to the long-term solution and they implement that because that's what makes sense at the site. I think in this case, the feeling is, and is maybe leaning more towards the intermediate solution solves the problem that is causing those crashes,
Mhm.
right? But ultimately, the long-term solution is a safer project, right?
Yeah.
And so if DOT is only at this point going to implement the intermediate solution, we can certainly add the long-term solution to the long-range plan. And, maybe it makes its way to the top and gets into the 10-year plan at some point, and we can implement it that way. The other piece to look at for that would be, we're doing a, what's called a safety action plan. And this is through another federal safety program called the Safe Streets and Roads for All. And when we've completed that safety action plan, which should be at the end of this year, very beginning of next year, projects like the South Road intersection and community Brentwood would become eligible to submit for a federal grant to fund that project. And that would pay 100% of the cost of the project, as well as, it would, give a little bit of boost because you've already done some planning work around it. It's an identified solution. It's the safest solution for that intersection, which is something that the feds are definitely looking for. And my understanding is that if they're choosing between projects where one project is proposing to implement the safest option and one is proposing to implement a safe but not quite as safe option, they'll choose the one that's putting in the safest option. And so I think there's a benefit for that type of thing where, one, you've already done, some analysis has already been done on this project, and it would be a really good candidate, I think, for that SS4A money. If it isn't going to be fully funded through DOT, through the HSIP program.
If we were to try to add it to the long range plan, that wouldn't preclude the
Absolutely not.
SS4A.
No,
So
absolutely not.
could be an approach to cover all bases
Yep.
if we wanted
Yeah,
to.
I recommend that even.
Yeah.
I just had a clarifying question about that project, because I know that at the meeting with DOT, we did kind of a rough, show of hands among members of the public, but for the intermediate solution and the long-term solution. But did the select board end up voting? The select board did vote as well? Okay. Okay, all right, thank you.
I mean, one thing I'll add is that whenever a project gets into the state tenure plan, it goes through a full design process, no matter what. So even if it was, let's say, a roundabout proposed, it's going to go through the full, design process that DOT does. That means more public meetings. It means more discussion with the community about what's the best fit for the community. So it may go in as a roundabout. It's possible it comes out as a signalized intersection, that kind of thing. Nothing is guaranteed. That being said, I'm guessing that through the SS4A program, they're going to want to see the most safe solution implemented, even if that isn't necessarily what's desired by the community or the DOT. They would choose the roundabout over the signal every time, right? So, those are things to weigh and things to consider. Maybe a little early to consider some of those things at this point, but it is, to be part of the discussion.
Yeah, something to keep track of.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know another priority in town, just, it's come up at other meetings, is the 125 corridor. I know you and I have discussed this before. I believe there was recently released the list of the top 25 priority corridors in the
Yes.
state, and 125 is on them. Couldn't ever find the actual rankings. I don't know where it ranks, but would you say at this point, because DOT appears to be focusing on these corridors and moving that forward, however slowly, the best bet is to sit back, maybe write letters of support or whatever, but not try and take that on as a town?
Right. I wouldn't say that, honestly. So the ranking of the corridors, that was done statewide by DOT, and it was done, so they looked at basically all the state highway corridors in the state, and they tried to rank them in terms of need for improvements or need of study. And 125 was in the top 25. I don't necessarily agree with how they did it, but the important thing is that 125 is in the top 25. And really what that is DOT, the GASSET, the Governor's Advisory Council on Intermodal Transportation, sort of requested that DOT develop this ranking so that they can choose which corridor studies to approach first, right? And so, 125 is up there in the top 25. It's going to be up to the council to decide which corridors are studied. The way that they did it though is they looked at the entire corridor as opposed to sort of subsegments of it. But 125, you know, there was a corridor study in Plastow and Kingston between the state line and Route 111, the sort of southern connection to 111 in the late 90s that they just finished implementing the projects on. In Kingston, you know, the last project is that straddles the Kingston-Plastow line is scheduled to be constructed in 2026. So we don't really need to look at that again.
Yeah.
You know, the section from Epping north to Rochester has been studied maybe 15 years ago or so now. Well, that maybe could use another look. The section here between basically 101 in south through Brentwood and into the northern part of Kingston hasn't been looked at ever. And so for me, it's like, well, why are you looking at the whole corridor? You should be focused on those areas that have been ignored in the past.
Yeah.
And let's address those first. But and I know, you know, Councilor Stevens, I think, feels similarly in terms of the priority for 125. We've, for the last at least 10 years, we've been saying at RPC that we have 3 priorities for corridor studies in the region. 111 from Kingston west to Salem, 125 in this section, and then Route 33 in Greenland and Stratham. So those are the ones that we would love to see studied. And we're hopeful that the corridor study program that DOT put in the 10-year plan 6 years ago will start to actually happen and we'll start addressing those. So, but I don't think it's premature to start identifying projects on 125 or on any of these corridors and start them moving through the planning process. You know, if anything, you know, if DOT does decide they want to do a corridor study in this area, you know, we may pause on moving those projects in the interim while they go through the corridor study process. But I think having them on our planning already identifies them as needs, and it just will help in the end.
Yeah, I meant specifically like we shouldn't try to initiate a corridor study project. Like
No,
DOT needs to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can certainly, you know, reach out to Councilor Stevens and express the community's support for studying 125 in Brentwood.
Okay.
I think that's probably the best approach. Ultimately, the executive council is who's making the decision about which corridor studies are done each cycle, and their DOT put $700,000 in funding in per year with the intent that would cover 2 corridor studies per year.
Okay.
Whether that covers 2 or whether it covers 3 is going to depend on, you know, is it a 5-mile corridor they're studying or a 50-mile corridor study that they're studying? So, you know, there'll be some variety there. But I think the best we can do at this point is indicate what our priorities are and what we would support, and you know, hope the executive council is supportive of that as well.
Cool. Awesome. Any other fun?
So Dave, you know how much I love transportation
I
planning.
know how much you love it.
So it was lovely to hear your dulcet tones again. Now, for projects that aren't lucky enough to get into the highway safety improvement program, because that's 100% DOT?
The Safe Streets and Roads for All is 100% funding for implementation projects. HSIP is essentially 100% funded with federal funds. Yes. So yeah. So safety. Federal Highway Administration puts a very big emphasis on safety projects, and so they don't necessarily require a match, or it's a 90-10 match in some situations. On something like, if it was on 125, I would expect that DOT would be providing any match for a project on 125 because it's a major state highway. Right? If you were proposing something on a town road, I would expect the town would probably need to come up with any match requirements.
And so this is the crux of my question. What is our responsibility for those projects that do end up requiring a community match? When do we need to show that in our capital improvements program? It's so that it doesn't become something someone can point at and say, it's not in their capital improvements program.
Right.
So we're going to go to a town that has it in their capital improvements program.
Right. You know, that's a great question. I don't necessarily have a solid answer for you on that. I know, for instance, like the city of Portsmouth tends to put stuff in their capital improvement program ahead of time and then just not spend the money or not fund it.
Right, so keep it
but
in
it's
the out
there.
year,
It's-
the back years, five
Yeah,
and 6.
But it's there. But
Because I don't want that to become a reason for somebody else to be able to unprioritize
Right.
our position.
And often when a project requires, there are certain programs that DOT has where they require a match. The Transportation Alternatives Program, the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, which tend to focus around, bike and pedestrian type improvements, improvements that reduce auto emissions, those types of things, where those are competitive programs. DOT will ask you when you submit a project for those right off the bat that for a commitment to fund whatever match. And that's usually a letter from the selectman saying, if we get selected for this, we'll put it to a town meeting vote to get the funding. And other than that, it's really a little bit more haphazard as to how it works. If it's something through the 10-year plan, we've never had a 10-year plan project go forward that wasn't fully funded by DOT at this point, because they've all tended to be on state highways, or in areas that are covered 100%. And I think it would basically, if DOT puts it in the 10-year plan, say Brentwood puts a project on a local road, it gets selected for funding, and it makes its way into the 10-year plan, it's going to be placed in year 9 or 10 of the 10-year plan. And then there'll be, at some point, 4 or 5 years down the line, there'll be a project agreement that is made between the town and DOT that basically says the town is committing to funding their portion of this project, or managing the project, or whatever it happens to be.
So at that point, we would
At that
definitely
point,
have to include.
You would want to have it, but there's some time there. It doesn't have to be overnight. Ideally, if you're submitting a project like that, there is a commitment, but we also recognize that, the select board today can't commit the town in 5 years to spend money. So it's sort of a little bit of a give and take process.
And it still can go to town vote?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is 111A or Route 27 on any of those dockets?
Like, there
For
are.
repairs, safety, walking?
So let's see.
There's only one Brentwood project on the long range plan. It's I wanna say Pickpocket, the intersection of Pickpocket Road
Yeah.
and.
Oh, yeah.
So that's yeah. and
Which
that's
is
a
pretty
holdover.
clear.
Pine Road, where
Yeah.
those big trucks come.
Yeah, and that's a holdover from when John Kennedy was your commissioner, and so he had put forward that project a number of years ago, and so we keep it in there because it seems like there's still interest in the community of having that intersection of Pickpocket and 111A addressed. But other than that, no other projects have necessarily been identified on those roads. That being said, DOT, those are state highways, so DOT does do routine maintenance and paving occasionally on those roads. And
Occasionally.
occasionally,
Yeah, like
they have
every 20 years.
they have a cycle where they try to pave roads every 5 years. They don't always get there because the cost of paving has outstripped the ability to pay for it. And so, and as things get more and more expensive, they've had to ratchet back how many miles. Their goal is to pave 400 miles a year. Something along those lines. And last year they were able to pave somewhere closer to 300. So, they're sort of falling behind a little bit on that. But they still try to focus on keeping those roads that are in good shape, because it's much cheaper to throw a 1-inch shim of pavement over a road as opposed to reconstruct it from the ground up. It's like 50,000 a mile versus 500,000 a mile kind of
Yeah.
thing. So,
Makes sense.
questions?
Any questions from the public?
I have a quick question, Dave. What was the step that New Hampshire needs to complete before the Safe Streets and Roads program
Yeah, that's the safety action plan, and that's what we're working on right now.
A
we're gonna-
completed safety action
Yep,
plan
yep.
for the state.
And so, well, no, it's for our region.
Oh, just for us.
So we are working, we submitted a joint application to the Federal Highway Administration with the other 3 metropolitan planning organizations in the state. So it's actually 72 communities out of the state. And it's mostly those of us in this sort of southeast corner, basically from Nashua, Manchester, up almost to Concord and over to the coast. And once we have that safety action plan in place for the region, all of our communities are eligible to apply for implementation grants. And there's $1 billion a year available in that SS4A funding, and the feds really want to spend it on implementing projects. So,
Okay.
the best, the better we can come up with.
What's the time frame for completing the plan?
We are expecting to have a draft done at the end of this year and approvals by the commission in January, February timeframe. The application process for the federal program this year started up in February. And like they took February to like April, some projects could be submitted. And then they did a second one later in the year too, because they didn't get enough projects that they could successfully fund. So, sometimes there's opportunities for twice a year, but there are 2 more cycles of that program guaranteed. So next year and the year after. After that, it may go away. We hope not, but the federal government tends to do their funding, their federal transportation programs are 5-year cycles. So and depending on what administration is in, when that goes in, you sometimes can seesaw wildly between what's allowed for projects and what programs stick around and what go away. And who controls Congress plays a role in that as well. And so we can never quite be sure beyond that 5 years what's going to be there. We're hopeful that this SS4A program will stick around and we can get some projects out of that.
Does Congress even have a Speaker of the House? Is sometimes a factor nowadays.
Yes, I mean, it used to be that infrastructure was sort of a bipartisan thing. It's become less so as with everything lately, and so we don't really count on anything sticking around. So.
It's my understanding there's gonna be some sort of public outreach component
Yes.
to that.
The first thing we're doing is a survey. That will be going out in the next couple of weeks, probably. But we are also doing some both in-person and virtual engagement activities to try to get some feedback from people who are involved in their communities, just the general public, anybody that is interested in traffic safety and transportation safety issues. We want to hear from them. So.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Jen. Any other questions from the crowd?
All right.
Mark.
All right.
Simply because something ends up on the 10-year plan doesn't mean it's ever gonna get completed. Is that a correct statement?
Usually, if it's on the 10-year plan, unless it runs into some catastrophic, we can't build this reason.
Okay.
Usually, if it's on the 10-year plan, that's DOT committing to building that project in some shape or form.
Okay.
It may be that it doesn't look exactly like you think it's going to look. If the project is submitted with one design and scope, and when they get into the engineering, they discovered, well, we can't really build that for some reason. Recently there's a project on Squamscott Road in Stratham. It was billed as a simple culvert replacement. They wanted to expand the size of the culvert, but the subsoil underneath it won't support the weight of a bigger culvert, so they had to sort of rethink the design entirely. That's the kind of thing that happens.
Something will be done.
And if it's an extreme enough change, they may not be able to build all of it. Another example is Ocean Boulevard in Hampton Beach. It's in the 10-year plan as a $9 million project. That is a $50 million project. So what DOT is doing is they're phasing it. They've committed to funding phase 1. They think they can find the funding for phase 2. Phase 3, they're not sure about at this point, but they're doing the design work, and they'll have it all ready to go, and if we find funding for it, they can keep it moving forward. So that's different types of things happen. It might slow a project down, it might change the scope slightly or significantly, but usually DOT will commit to funding it. The one time I've seen where things don't move forward entirely is when a community has said, we don't want this at all. And that has happened occasionally. But usually, if it's in the queue, there's a commitment there.
Yeah, kind of going along Mark's question, like if there's a situation where there's like a serious like budget shortfall at the state level, is that something that would typically adversely impact programs like this?
Most of the funding in the 10-year plan is federal funding.
Okay.
The state puts very little of their own funding into that.
Okay.
And most of that funding goes towards addressing maintenance and preservation on roads that aren't eligible for federal funding.
Okay.
So where we do have to worry is if the next 5-year transportation program comes out from the feds and they say, we can't afford to do it at the level we're doing, we're gonna cut it back by 25%. That's when things start to get, usually it's not getting rid of things entirely, it's more that the timeline stretches out. You know, if we can do 25% fewer projects each year, the timeline will stretch. And that's it used to be though, I don't know, 10 to 15 years ago, the joke was it was a 10-year plan, but it was really like a 30-year plan because it was so overprogrammed. But DOT has done a lot of work over the intervening years to basically refine it down and make sure that at least on paper we can afford to build what we're saying we can afford to build. And so they try to really limit it. Hence why we're limited to $8 million a cycle.
Right.
And that sort of thing. So. Any other thoughts?
I think that's it, yeah,
Thank you so much.
Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate
Thank you.
the time.
Thank you, Dave.
I have a handful of copies here of that flyer that I gave out. There's certainly enough here for the board, plus a few extra probably. And I know
That's online.
Yeah, it's online, and so I'll just leave them with you guys, and you can distribute them and go from there. But it is online on our website at therpc.org, so as well as all sorts of other information that you might. And if you have any further questions or needs, just reach out. Usually around.
Really appreciate it.
So,
Thanks.
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Oh,
Good
fuck
luck
you.
with all the college.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's
Congratulations.
a busy weekend.
Yeah,
Busy weekend. So,
congrats to the kids.
thanks. Thanks. I get my USB stick back.
Oh, yeah, I don't want that.
So it's-
No, you can sell.
Well, that's all right.
We're keeping.
Keeping it. All right.
See you later.
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care. everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Do you want me to make it go away? Okay, you don't have to.
So, next on the agenda is the site plan review application for, the Greg Lambert and Sons. This one we're just.
They have requested to continue to June 20th.
Okay,
Make a motion to continue June 20th for the Greg Lambert and Son Realty LLC.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just spaced. You continue that to a time and date certain?
We,
Right.
the
Yeah.
20th.
June 20th. Yeah.
Because I
That's
just
the one
was
that they,
not following closely enough.
That is the date they requested, so.
just out of curiosity, is there any reason to not keep continuing? Because this one's been continued for a while now.
No.
Okay.
I mean, they really wanted an approval at their last meeting.
Okay.
There were several things that were not ready.
Right. And they're not necessarily in control of when those get ready. So, okay.
Next on the agenda is board business, hobby tracks. What specifically is the business related?
The board asked to find out a little bit more information because they asked to be allowed to do this activity at their site.
Okay.
And the board asked to see where the activity would be happening as referenced on some sort of drawing of their site. And they provided the information. The goal is to provide this service 2 days a week on Saturdays and Sundays. And it all happens within the building. There isn't an exterior component to this, which we thought that there was gonna be, so. It's pretty low impact.
And it's within,
It's pretty low impact.
and it's within the existing approved use.
We're stating that it doesn't require a new site plan review.
Okay.
So is there any action we need to take, or?
I think as long as the board just goes on record as saying that they don't need additional site plan review.
Do we need to do a motion?
Yeah, someone should make that.
Someone wanna make a motion about what?
I'll make a motion. That we will take,
That hobby tracks would require additional site plan review.
that, took the words right out of my mouth.
Second.
All in favor?
I
Any discussion, I'm supposed to ask any discussion, right?
Yes.
Any discussion?
and if that changes, like if they want to add an outside track or something, then the expectation would be that they'd come back. Yeah.
Correct.
Yep.
Any public,
I just had one quick question, and I don't think it's like a particularly big deal, but if I recall, I think it may have come up the last time we talked about it. Have they provided any guidance in terms of what they expect in terms of like daily traffic for what they do? Like, 'cause I seem to remember there was a question about that, and they were a little bit non-committal about it.
Because the person who's doing this has never done it before.
Fair enough. Yeah.
He really doesn't have an estimate.
Yeah.
It only had its first opening 2 weeks ago,
Okay.
and apparently there wasn't a lot of attendance.
Okay. Fair enough.
any public comment, question? Okay. Did we vote?
We did.
You did, yeah.
And it passed.
DMV applications.
We have two. The first one is for Robert's Motor Group, and he is looking to do sales. The site plan is behind you if anybody needs to look at that.
There's an approved site plan on the site for automotive sales.
Hold,
Okay.
pause. DMV to me means the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Yep.
Why, what, can you just tell me what these are?
The dealer desk in New Hampshire won't grant a permit to someone for any of the activities that they provide permission for without the input from the local. And so when the dealer desk was asked for automotive sales, they send the permit request to us.
Gotcha.
And the planning board has to provide them feedback.
Okay.
Didn't they ask for this before?
Yes.
I think it's just a new dealer.
There's already been a site plan for that particular.
Right,
We
this
had the fence
is-
put up, and then we talked
Correct,
about
this is-
plantings, we
This
had
is a new,
a sidewalk there.
Right.
this is a new person, and when a new person does
Oh,
it,
okay.
they have to
Which-
get all new permission from.
But I would suggest to this board that they look at the amount of parking spaces that are allowed on that site plan,
So
and then take a drive by.
I was about to ask, which of the car places is this?
This is the one that's next to the dog grooming place and the old ice cream place.
Chris Cagle.
Oh,
On the hill.
relatively new on the hill, yeah. I think that's a good suggestion Mark just made.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a car.
That's what I would suggest, is that you drive by, note how many parking spaces there are, and how many vehicles should be on that lot.
When we did the
Drive by.
sidewalk though, we did not make a determination how many,
They have, they're allowed 13 vehicle display spaces and 26 vehicle storage spaces.
Oh, okay.
I knew there was a, yes. there was-
Are they in compliance right now?
Thank you.
Where my question?
Oh.
Yeah,
Maybe
this
big.
is the one.
Okay.
When they were bringing their cars out, they were all over the place, so I couldn't tell.
And where is?
Is that which,
Maybe a dumb question, but is whether or not they're in compliance our purview, or is our purview just,
Well, those numbers that Jillian just stated, they're the approvals that are attached to our approval. So if they exceed those, it would become a code enforcement issue for the town.
yeah, I guess, should we be the ones that are going and checking if they're meeting that, or
Not
should-
us, but I know that the planning board typically tells the select board when there's,
in violation?
right,
If we're aware of it.
right.
I only mention this because this is a new applicant. He may not be aware of the rules regarding this piece of property.
He is,
He did come speak with you.
yes, he's imminently aware of the site review.
like, just playing devil's advocate, I guess, is it appropriate for us to kind of hold up the process to go inspect? If that's like not our normal role, or would you say that that's totally normal?
We're just
in your opinion?
approving the activity, and he's supposed to be in compliance.
Exactly.
And if he's not, then we,
It could be a code enforcement issue.
Yeah.
And that's separate from this.
So like, if we wanted to approve it today, and then we find out tomorrow he's not in compliance. we just-
Yes, this permission, this is a state permission, so it doesn't waive any requirement at the local level.
Right, it's right on here, how many spaces
Yeah,
we allow.
I think it's, Mark's suggestion isn't a bad one by any means, but I just,
you don't
I'm
want to
not
hold up
sure
the
if we should
opportunity.
hold
I
everything.
did not mention it with the intent to hold this man's application.
Oh, no, I was,
Okay.
My
I just,
intent
I'm
was to make the board aware,
Yeah,
that is all.
so, does someone wanna make a motion to approve
I'll make a motion to approve.
the Roberts Motor Group? We probably have to do each one separately.
Yes, they
Yeah.
they would have to be done.
I'll make a motion on to approve the Roberts.
second.
Any further discussion? Any public discussion?
What are the vehicles being displayed? What, are they old-fashioned vehicles?
No, they're just regular
No,
vehicles.
it's just,
Like
For
for
sale,
sale?
For
Yes.
sale.
Cars and-
yeah, it's a used car dealership.
There's a nice Corvette over there that's a convertible.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And then,
The next one is for 125 Brentwood LLC, and that one's at 424 Route 125, Unit 12.
And that's one of the units at the Finwell, little,
Up on the hill?
yes, the commercial complex that's back there. And there is already an automotive dealer, an automotive repair dealer in that mix of buildings.
And this one is for inspection.
and that's approved
Okay.
already?
It's an approved use at the site, yes.
Okay. Anyone wanna make a motion on that one?
Make a motion, we approve mission complete performance for 24 Route 125 for inspections.
Second.
Any discussion? Any public comment, discussion?
All in favor?
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I wasn't sure what that was.
I knew it.
Okay,
Do you-
should we do the minutes approval before we sign stuff and potentially go and,
Yeah, could you, so I can go print the manifest real quick?
sure.
Thanks.
Do we have all these minutes in our packet? take a beat to skim the minutes.
That's a whole lot of minutes.
Yeah.
Sealed minutes right here.
Dumb question, but do we need to be in non-public to approve sealed minutes?
No, because we
No.
have to do more.
Okay.
Oh, that's not so bad, because April 18th and May 12th are listed twice.
Those ones are sealed, there's 3 sets. I don't know if you wanna do them each separately.
We're good.
Do you guys need a little more time to review the minutes?
Oh,
Okay.
Let's make sure I have them all here. 5-2, 5-2.
So,
I don't know if they need copies of the sealed ones to review or.
are these all my copies?
Yeah.
Here.
I didn't wanna pass them around, so I didn't. While you guys are looking at the minutes, I guess I will take a moment to say that this could possibly be my last planning board meeting. I have accepted another position, still at the town office, and I will not leave you high and dry, but I'm going to become Karen's assistant. So,
Good for you.
Make a motion, we disapprove this action?
we do not
Immediately.
accept.
Recording in progress.
Congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's sad for us.
Like Julie
She's
said,
leaving us.
this
She's-
will be his last planning board meeting. She accepted a position as Karen's assistant, so she's going to be in the town office.
And her replacement is sitting in the chair.
Started me out.
I don't even know what I'm looking at. I do know what I'm looking at.
So, are you guys still flipping through those a little bit?
Good.
Jillian, you're killing me. Can we make a motion to approve them all in one go?
No.
I wish.
Tell me more about what we need to do.
Take one at a time.
You need to take them one at a time.
Why?
March 21st, non-public.
Make a motion, we approve March 21st.
Was I in that meeting?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Ooh, the sealed minutes, right?
If you were not here, but you read
I
it,
was
it's
here.
fine.
Correct.
I don't think there was.
Did you see it?
Yeah,
If the time is appropriate, I'll make a motion to accept the April 18th minutes.
okay, any second?
Second?
Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any second?
If the time is appropriate, I'll make a motion to approve the sealed May 2nd minutes.
Any second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Give me a second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I think that's all of them, right?
May 2nd.
No, that'd be the
open.
May 2nd, just regular meeting minutes.
Right.
Oh, we have to do them separately, okay.
Make a motion, we accept the May 2nd meeting minutes.
Any second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now you're done.
Nice job.
Woo.
Very efficient.
The sealed minutes, do we give those back to,
I think so.
yeah, well, the sealed minutes we'll give back to Jillian.
Take them off,
So much paper.
Well, it,
To
recycle 'em.
Letty B.
Oh,
have any
fair enough.
Yeah,
non-public
just, right there.
business?
I don't think so. I think that everyone received the most latest update that I got.
And Jillian, you said you didn't have any non-public stuff.
I just had.
It's half the distance or a third of the distance.
I always ask them.
Here's your pile.
So she seemed real happy.
So we just sign here?
Yes.
Do I need to do anything with
Next week, maybe?
Nope. Just sign them in.
23rd.
Here's your recycle.
Yeah, that's it.
minutes? Does anyone on the board have any other business to discuss?
Just a couple things. I wanted to update the board on, we discussed House Bill 1291 at our last meeting, and we sent a letter to Senator Gannon with requesting that the bill be amended. The Senate hasn't voted on the bill yet, but the committee voted to refer the bill to interim study, which would kill the bill. But, you know, and I'll just say for the record, my hope was that they could have come to an amendment and maybe come to an agreement with the House on a bill. But unfortunately, that's not the direction they went. So it'll probably end up as future legislation, and hopefully in the future we'll have an opportunity to collaborate with our legislators to craft legislation around ADUs that helps expand access to housing while also balancing the needs of our community. But so just want to update folks that the committee recommendation is interim study, and I think that they'll probably be voting on that at their next session. And then also just a couple updates from economic development, and Jillian, please let me know if I leave anything out that's important. But we're planning the next business breakfast. A date has not been set for that yet, but we're looking at the week of June 17th. And I believe it was it Grant Hageman was the Chase Hageman, excuse me. John Morgan's going to be reaching out to him to see his schedule and if he would be amenable to being a guest speaker. We also discussed and voted on the idea of having a grant writer position in town, and also discussed the idea of a multi-purpose pavilion at Olson Field that could be used for year-round purposes, including for basketball, bocce, and then pickleball, which is particularly popular. Did I leave anything out, or is there anything I'm missing?
Will it be rented? Can people rent it to use it?
Yep.
Probably. I just wanted to clarify the pavilion, the rec stuff. John was summarizing what was discussed at a recent visioning meeting.
Right,
It wasn't
okay.
necessarily something that the economic development. committee
Right.
came up with.
Right.
Good.
I
So
mean,
are you giving up that job too? Economic development?
Mm-hmm.
That's up in the air.
Yes.
TBD.
Still in cemetery.
Any other
That's okay.
discussion or comments or anything from the board? Any public discussion or comments, questions? Okay, I think
Make a motion, we go into non-public.
No.
oh, I don't think we have.
Oh, I
any.
thought you said we had something.
No, I was,
Okay, sorry. Update. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Good job, team.
Good job. Nice job. We got through it.
Gotta work on the rules and procedure a little bit, but.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. We'd be a mess.
Are you gonna be the new administrative assistant? We would have so much fun. Hi.
I've been on the one-stop site on DES to
Yes.
see if Grove has filed an extension request. I haven't seen anything yet, so the deadline's Monday. So